There is a particular kind of silence that follows you when you realize your life is not meant to follow the crowd. It's not the quiet of peace, it's the quiet of weight, of responsibility, of feeling something stir inside you that no one else seems to notice, much less understand. If you've ever felt this kind of silence, not lonely in the sense of being unloved, but in the sense of being unseen in your depth, then perhaps you are what St. John Paul II might have called a chosen soul. He never used the phrase chosen one in the theatrical modern sense. To him, being chosen meant being called, and being called meant being wounded. It meant carrying a cross, sometimes invisible but never light. John Paul II himself lost his mother, brother and father by the time he was 21. He lived through war, totalitarianism, and the dehumanizing machinery of ideology. And yet, out of this wreckage came a voice of immense hope, compassion, and strength. He believed that those who are chosen often pass through a crucible of brokenness, not because they are weaker, but because their calling requires a soul forged in fire, a heart that has tasted loss so it can recognize suffering in others, a mind that has walked in darkness so it can speak truth into it. But what's rarely talked about is the psychological toll, the existential ache of being different, even when surrounded by people. You can be successful, admired, even loved, and still feel like no one truly gets what moves your spirit. You carry things you can't explain. You see things others overlook. You long for something higher, something real, and sometimes that longing isolates you. St. John Paul II would have said, that isolation is not proof that you're broken, it's evidence that you're being prepared. That your loneliness is not a punishment, it's a passage. And if you're walking it, you're not alone. He walked it too. There is a weight that lives inside those who carry a deeper calling, and it is almost always invisible. To the world, you might look like you're holding it all together, maybe even thriving. You go to work, you show up for others, you smile when needed. But internally, you carry questions no one has answered. You hold convictions that make you feel like a stranger, even among those you love. This is the quiet suffering of the called, and it often goes unnoticed. St. John Paul II understood this burden intimately, not just as a spiritual leader, but as a man. He once said, "Do not be afraid of your own inner self." But that's easier said than done. Because when you're different, when you see beyond the surface of things, when you feel an inner pull toward meaning in a world obsessed with appearances, you begin to feel like you don't belong. This is especially true in American culture, where productivity often replaces introspection, and vulnerability can be mistaken for weakness. For people in their 40s, 50s, and beyond, the dissonance grows sharper. You've lived enough to know what truly matters, but you may still be surrounded by noise, by expectations, by people who don't see your inner landscape. John Paul II spoke of this in spiritual terms, but his message touches psychology too. He saw that those who are set apart, by temperament, by pain, or by providence, often feel a deep sense of otherness. This can lead to depression, anxiety, or a subtle form of emotional exhaustion. Not because you're fragile, but because you carry more than most. Your mind is always turning. Your heart is always discerning. And here lies the paradox. The very thing that isolates you is also the thing that makes you capable of deeper love, truer faith, and lasting purpose. But that doesn't make the burden easy. It just makes it holy. If you've ever felt like your soul is carrying something too big for words, something you didn't ask for but can't deny, know this. John Paul II would have seen you. He would have called you brave. There's a quiet truth that most people never say out loud. Many of the most compassionate, wise, and resilient souls are shaped not by success, but by suffering. St. John Paul II knew this deeply. He believed that wounds, when faced with honesty and faith, don't disqualify you from your calling. They prepare you for it. But we often don't see it that way. In the American mindset especially, where achievement is king and pain is something to fix, hide, or medicate, it's easy to feel like brokenness is failure. Like if you were truly strong, you wouldn't feel so deeply. You wouldn't still be hurting. You wouldn't still be carrying memories that cut. But St. John Paul II offered a radical reversal. What if your wound is not the end of your path, but the beginning of your purpose? He wasn't romanticizing pain. He had lived through brutality, through watching friends disappear under tyranny, through the quiet ache of a nation under siege. But he also believed in the redemptive mystery of suffering, that through it something in us is refined, that it clears out illusions, breaks down ego, and forces us to encounter what truly matters. From a psychological lens, this matches what modern trauma studies confirm. Post-traumatic growth is real. People who survive intense emotional hardship often develop greater empathy, clarity, and spiritual depth, but only if they walk through it consciously, only if they don't numb it, deny it, or bury it. That's where John Paul II's wisdom hits home. He challenges us to look at our wounds not as shameful secrets, but as sacred doors. Not as something to escape, but as something that, if embraced, can lead to transformation. In his words, suffering unleashes love. That doesn't mean you have to pretend to enjoy the pain. It means your heartbreak, your setbacks, your confusion, they can become the very thing that softens your heart, opens your eyes, and deepens your mission. So if you've been walking wounded, carrying a story no one knows, aching in silence, maybe that wound isn't the end of your path. Maybe it's the way forward. One of the most painful parts of being set apart is the misunderstanding. You speak from the soul, and people hear it as intensity. You pull away to reflect, and they see distance. You act out of conscience, and they call it pride. Over time, this gap between your inner world and others' perception can become deeply disorienting. St. John Paul II knew this feeling well. He often stood alone in his convictions. As a young priest under communist rule, he refused to conform to systems that reduced people to ideologies. As Pope, he defended human dignity when it wasn't popular, and he spoke out for truth even when it made people uncomfortable. He knew that being true to your inner compass often means walking through long seasons of rejection, even ridicule. And here's the psychological twist. When we're misunderstood again and again, we start to doubt ourselves. We internalize the confusion. Maybe I am too much, you think. Maybe I am difficult. This is especially true for those in midlife and beyond, when you're supposed to have it all figured out, but still feel unseen. But St. John Paul II would urge you, don't abandon your soul to fit into a world that doesn't understand it. In the American context, this tension is intense. We live in a culture that praises visibility, likability, conformity, yet rarely makes room for the depth that many over 45s carry. You've experienced loss, love, failure, reinvention, but the world often wants performance, not presence. Being misunderstood doesn't mean you're broken. It might mean you're carrying something the world isn't ready to hear yet. The great spiritual and psychological figures, from John of the Cross to Viktor Frankl, all shared this exile of spirit. They knew what it meant to carry light in a world addicted to surface. St. John Paul II didn't just survive this misunderstanding, he transcended it by anchoring his identity in something deeper, truth. He would tell you now, with gentleness and power, you are not alone. You are not wrong. You are walking the narrow road. There is a specific kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being abandoned or unloved. It comes from carrying a vision that others can't yet see. You feel called to something deeper, more meaningful, more aligned with truth. But when you try to express it, people change the subject. When you live it, they call you unrealistic. You don't belong to the noise of the world anymore, but you're not yet embraced by the silence of fulfillment. This is the in-between, and St. John Paul II knew it well. He believed that those with vision are often asked to walk alone for a time. Not because they're being punished, but because vision is heavy. Not everyone wants to see the truth. Not everyone is ready for the cost of depth. And when you carry that kind of clarity, even just a seed of it, you often feel isolated. This is especially common among those in their second half of life. By the time you reach your 40s or 50s, you've seen what superficial success can't fix. You've begun to sense what actually matters: love, truth, legacy, spiritual integrity. but that awareness can leave you feeling emotionally exiled. The conversations around you feel shallow, the priorities of others seem foreign, and you wonder, am I the only one who sees what's really happening? John Paul II would answer, no, you are not. But you may have to go first. He believed that loneliness was not a sign of failure, but of maturity. In his view, the soul must sometimes walk into the desert before it finds its home. And in that desert you are refined. You learn to hear God again. You learn to trust your intuition. You learn to walk not by approval, but by principle. From a psychological perspective, this aligns with what Carl Jung called individuation, the process of becoming fully oneself. It often begins with solitude, not chosen but required. And through it, your life shifts from performance to authenticity. So if you feel alone because you see further, feel deeper, or want more from this life, you're not broken. You're becoming who you were meant to be. At some point, every called soul reaches a breaking point. Not a dramatic collapse, but a quiet moment when you wonder, how much longer can I keep going like this? You've been strong for too long. You've kept faith while feeling forgotten. You've shown up for others while running on empty. And beneath it all, there's that lingering question. Is any of this really worth it? St. John Paul II would have said yes, not with easy optimism, but with a lived authority. He never denied the weight of suffering. But he also believed that grace meets us right there, in the moment of exhaustion, in the place of doubt, in the quiet crack where the light gets in. He wrote, "Do not abandon yourselves to despair. We are the Easter people, and hallelujah is our song." These weren't the words of someone who had life easy. They came from a man who buried his family, led a church under threat, and faced an assassin's bullet. He knew despair, but he also knew resurrection. In American culture, we're taught to push through pain, to hustle, fix, achieve, and stay positive. But this often bypasses the deeper work the soul longs for, the work of sitting with our struggle and allowing grace to enter it, not erase it. Psychologically, this is where real transformation happens, when we stop fighting our pain and start asking what it's trying to teach us, when we stop numbing the ache and begin tending to it. This isn't weakness, it's spiritual maturity. John Paul II would say that in those moments where you feel like giving up, something holy is taking root. That grace doesn't always come as relief. Sometimes it comes as endurance, as an inner stillness you can't explain, as a subtle shift in how you see your pain, not as something cruel, but as something sacred. And when that shift happens, everything changes. You don't become invincible, but you become anchored. And that anchor holds even in the storm. So if you're in that struggle now, wait, watch. There is grace here. And it has not forgotten you. We live in a culture that equates strength with movement, with hustle, action, speaking up, pushing through. But St. John Paul II offered a different kind of wisdom, that some of the deepest strength a person can have is found in stillness, in the quiet resolve to remain rooted when everything around you is shifting. He himself was a man of great inner stillness. Even when the world demanded urgency, his response was presence. Even when he was under threat, politically, physically, ideologically, he did not rush. He listened, he discerned, he remained. And this stillness wasn't passivity, it was power under control. For many Americans, especially those in their later decades of life, this message feels countercultural. We've been told that slowing down is weakness, that reflection is indulgent, that if we're not constantly productive, we're falling behind. But inside, your soul knows better. There comes a time, often in midlife and beyond, when external motion no longer satisfies, when the real work becomes internal, when the hardest battles are not fought with effort, but with endurance. And the most courageous act is not to do more, but to be still and stay present. This is especially true for those who feel called, because your strength isn't just for you, it's for what you're meant to carry, to build, to heal, or to speak into the world. And that kind of strength needs deep roots. It needs the kind of soul that can pause in chaos, hold tension without snapping, and wait without losing faith. Psychologically, this is the moment when the ego begins to surrender. when the identity we built around roles, achievements, or control gives way to something more honest, something more whole. John Paul II once said, "Be not afraid." Not because life is easy, but because when you become anchored in stillness, in God, in truth, in your real self, fear loses its grip. You no longer react, you respond. You no longer chase, you choose. So if life is asking you to pause, to wait, to carry your mission in silence, do not see that as weakness. It might be your greatest strength taking shape. In the end, the myth of the chosen one breaks down when we expect perfection. St. John Paul II would be the first to reject that image. The chosen are not flawless, fearless, or endlessly confident. They are not immune to despair or above human weakness. What sets them apart is something far quieter and far more enduring: faithfulness. He once said, "The future starts today, not tomorrow." Not because he believed in pressure, but because he believed in presence, in showing up again and again, no matter how tired or misunderstood or uncertain you feel. The chosen are those who stay in the fight, not because they always believe they can win, but because they know they are called to continue. This is perhaps the greatest psychological and spiritual truth for those in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. You've learned by now that you will not always have clarity. You will not always feel strong. But what matters, what lasts, is that you remain faithful to what is true, to what your conscience knows, to what your soul keeps whispering, even when your mind is weary. St. John Paul II never claimed greatness for himself. His power came from his steadiness, from how he carried sorrow without letting it make him bitter, from how he held space for others, even while healing his own wounds, from how he chose to believe in the goodness of humanity, even when he had every reason to give up on it. This is what it means to be chosen, not to be superior, but to be available, to be willing, to say yes to your life, even when it feels heavy, even when no one is clapping, even when it doesn't make sense yet. So if you've walked this path of being broken but not bitter, lonely but not lost, burdened but not backing down, then hear this now. You are not forgotten. You are not failing. You are living the very life your calling requires. The chosen are not perfect. They are faithful. And in the end, that faithfulness becomes light, not just for you, but for everyone still trying to find their way.